my ex might stumble upon this. She'd probably recognize me just by my username, you know? But hey, it's been a solid 4 years since we called it quits, so I'm like, whatever. Let's just dive in. Now, if you're reading this and thinking, dude, you're in the wrong spot, just give me a heads up. But seriously, grab some popcorn or something because this is not going to be a short ride. I bumped into my ex back in our college days. Picture it. I was this 24-year-old guy, not much experience in the dating scene. I had just gotten out of this really draining relationship that lasted about a year. It wasn't a nightmare or anything, but it definitely wasn't meant to be, though we managed to keep it civil at the end. Before I met my ex, I was with someone who was battling some pretty heavy depression. I really did care about her, but her depression was like this heavy blanket that just smothered everything, including me. I've always been the type who can really feel what other people are feeling. Like if you're sad, I'm sad, that kind of thing. So you can imagine it got pretty overwhelming. Eventually, I had to end things for my own well-being. Enter my ex. We were neighbors in the same apartment complex, and we kind of hit it off after I helped her out here and there. One day she needed a ride, and that was kind of the kickstarter for our friendship, which then blossomed into us dating. Okay, so fast forward a bit in the story. We were together for like 2 years, and things seemed all good on the surface. Then, out of the blue, I find out she cheated on me. But get this, I didn't even catch wind of it until she was already engaged to someone else, just 3 months down the line. Talk about a shocker, right? But believe it or not, I ended up having the last laugh in the whole situation. It's like I was her shadow, tagging along wherever she went, whether she was kicking back at home or finishing up her shift at the sandwich spot where she worked. She was on a break from college, trying to get her mind right because she'd been through a rough patch with depression and a broken engagement not too long before our paths crossed. And from what I gathered, she never got around to going back to school, even hopping between universities a couple of times. Part of what glued us together from the start was her opening up about her past, how she'd been done dirty and cheated on by her ex. It was a bonding moment, you know? But as time went on, I started to scratch my head, wondering how much of her sob story was actually legit. We got super tight, ridiculously fast. It was like 0 to 60 in no time. She even had me meeting her folks after just a couple of months of us hanging out in this kind of undefined friends with benefits zone. But then, after a few more months of us being inseparable, I caught feelings and didn't want to play the field anymore. She was the only one I was interested in. So I popped the question, not the marriage one, but the will you be my girlfriend one. She hit me with a not ready because of the scars from her past engagement blowup. I should have seen the red flags waving right in my face, but I was wearing those love-blinded goggles and just let it slide. We kept on rolling like nothing happened, exclusive but not official. It was a weird limbo. A month later, I tried to have the talk again. My logic was simple. We're pretty much acting like a couple, so why not just make it official? Yet, she dodged it again. Despite these bumps in the road, there were moments when everything felt right out of a fairy tale. Our interests lined up perfectly, our future goals seemed to match, and our connection felt real and deep. So despite the early warning signs and the occasional dodgeball game with commitment, I was all in. I was convinced we were on the same wavelength, heading towards something special. It was like we were building our little world, just the two of us, and I was too caught up in the good times to question the occasional odd vibe or hesitation on her part. So every so often, she'd throw out these little jabs at me. Not the kind that knock you out, but the kind that sting and leave you wondering, what was that for? And man, the comparisons to her exes were something else. It was like I was in some weird competition I didn't sign up for. We'd get into squabbles over stuff so minor, I can't even remember most of it now. I'm all for keeping the peace, trying to dial things down, but she seemed to thrive on the drama. She'd make a dramatic exit from my apartment, and at the beginning, I'd be that guy, running after her, trying to fix whatever was wrong. But then she'd flip it on me, getting mad for not giving her space. So I adapted. Next time she stormed out, I stayed put, didn't chase her. And would you believe it? She turned it around, accusing me of not caring. It felt like being trapped in a no-win game. And then there was the gaslighting. Before I knew what gaslighting even was, I was living it. She'd twist things around, making me second-guess my own memories and perceptions. It's a mind game, really. At the time, I was clueless, just trying to keep the ship steady, thinking that's what you do for love. My friends saw what was happening from a mile away. They'd tell me straight, dude, you can do so much better, or she's not treating you right. But I'd brush it off, not ready to face the truth they were all seeing. It's funny how friends can see the storm coming long before you do, and man, were they right. We hit our 1 year anniversary, and I'm still there trying to bring up the idea of us being official. every time hoping for a different answer, but it was like hitting replay on the same disappointing track. She'd say she wasn't ready, even though she'd also say I was the best guy she'd ever dated. Go figure. All her friends knew we were an item, but to be honest, hanging out with them felt like being the odd one out in a club I never wanted to join. It was this bizarre limbo of being together, but not really being together, with every day bringing some new kind of confusion or drama. Looking back, it was clear we were stuck in this loop, where no matter how much I tried to make things right, it just kept spiraling. The mixed signals, the mind games, the constant push and pull, it was exhausting. But there I was, holding on, thinking that's just how relationships worked. Spoiler alert, it's not. She'd sometimes invite me to hang out with her crew, but honestly, they were like something straight out of a high school movie, all cliches and not really my vibe. Plus, they had a cat, and since I'm allergic, I'd often bow out using that as my get out of jail free card. Despite the social mismatches, we did have our moments. We went on dates and she'd call me every night. We'd stay on the phone just talking or sometimes just being there, silent, until one of us would eventually fall asleep and wake up the next morning with the phone still on. She told me that because of her depression, having me there, even just on the line, brought her comfort and helped her sleep better. But it wasn't all late night talks and comforting presence. We had our share of rough patches too. Things even got physical a couple of times. She thought it was funny to slap me hard, not once, but twice. It wasn't during a fight or anything. She just thought it would be a laugh. I made it clear to her that it wasn't cool, telling her it was disrespectful. I pointed out that I would never lay a hand on her in that way, and I expected the same respect in return. In the midst of one of our many arguments, she dropped a line that really stuck with me. She mentioned how her roommate knew plenty of guys in the complex who'd be interested in her, implying she didn't really need me. That should have been a huge wake-up call, but there I was, still hanging on. After more than a year of this back and forth, she finally agreed to make things official between us. But even then, it felt like she was keeping our relationship under wraps, hidden from everyone except her family. It was as if I was her secret, which just added another layer of complexity to our already complicated relationship. Even though I found it odd that she wanted to keep our relationship kinda on the down low, I didn't make a big deal out of it. I finally had what I'd been hoping for. We were officially an item, and that's what mattered to me at the time. But I've got to be real here and admit that it wasn't always on her. I had my moments too. Like her, I was dealing with my own battles with depression, not to mention the pressure from work, school, and family on top of everything going on with us. It was a lot, and sometimes I didn't handle it the best way. I'd snap, but I never got physical with her. Whenever we'd hit a rough patch, I'd bring up things she did that hurt me, trying to make her see my point of view. Our relationship was like a yo-yo. We broke up and got back together more times than I can count. Sometimes I was the one calling it quits, and other times it was her. In one of those breakup to makeup cycles, I'll admit, I played dirty. I resorted to manipulation, even self-harm, to really drive home how much pain I was in. Now, before you judge, know that she had done similar things, even talked about feeling suicidal. And in a twisted way, I guess I thought if it worked for her, it might work for me too. It was a dark place, and honestly, I was just trying to cope with the overwhelming emotions. Despite all the drama, the love felt real. We talked about a future together, getting married, having kids, deciding on where we'd live. It all seemed so tangible at the time. During all this, she moved a couple of times, first to an apartment just down the street, and then back to her parents' place about an hour north. Each move felt like it was adding distance, not just physically, but emotionally too. Yet, we kept trying to hold on to what we had, believing that love could somehow pull us through the chaos. Continuing this saga, when she was living in that apartment just down the street, she decided to throw a party. After the party wound down, and all her friends had left without offering to help clean up, it was just me who stayed behind to help her out. She pointed out that my willingness to help was a sign that I'd make a good husband. That comment stuck with me, especially after she moved back in with her parents. Despite the distance, I made it a point to visit her almost every week. But it wasn't long before I started sensing a shift between us. Her responses to my texts and calls began to lag more and more, yet she always expected me to reply immediately whenever she reached out. No matter what she needed or when she needed it, even if it was 1 a.m. and I had work or school the next day, I was there. A couple of months into this routine, I began floating the idea of getting engaged, hoping to move our relationship to the next level. But just like before, she fell back on her familiar pattern, using her depression and past relationship woes as reasons to hold back. Then, out of the blue, she suggested we revert to casually dating. Agreeing to that was probably the least sensible thing I'd ever done. But in my mind, it was a way to prove I was the right guy for her. Over the next few months, she went on dates with other people, yet she'd always make it a point to tell me about them, comparing them to me and insisting I was better. It was a bizarre situation, hearing about her dates and being told I was superior, yet not having her commitment. It felt like being stuck in limbo, caught between wanting to be the supportive, understanding boyfriend and feeling like I was just a safety net for her. I held off on dating anyone else because, frankly, I was completely head over heels for her. Even though we were technically just casually dating again, I had laid it out plainly for her. If she found someone else she wanted to be with, I'd step aside and let her pursue that relationship. It seemed only fair. But then, after some heart to heart chats with my friends and family, a light bulb went off in my head. Why was I bending over backward for someone who wasn't even officially my girlfriend anymore? So, I brought it up with her, and we agreed to put a pause on the physical side of our relationship until we could figure things out and maybe get back to being exclusive. Only, that's not how things panned out. We'd still go out on these so-called dates, and somehow she'd manage to guilt trip or pressure me into crossing lines we had agreed not to cross. And then right after, she'd flip the script, getting mad at me for not being strong enough to resist her or for not stopping her. It was like being trapped in a cycle of manipulation and blame. The situation took an even darker turn when she told me that if she ever got pregnant, she wouldn't even tell me about it. She said she'd make whatever decision she felt was necessary without considering my feelings or input. That cut me deep. Being a father someday is something I've always looked forward to, and the idea of potentially having a child out there that I might never know about or be able to support was heartbreaking. Despite all the hurtful things she said and did, we'd somehow always end up back together, making up, and continuing to dream about a future that seemed increasingly unrealistic. It was like being stuck in a toxic loop, where the brief moments of happiness we shared were overshadowed by a constant undercurrent of manipulation, guilt, and pain. Sometimes she'd see a mixed-race baby, I'm Latino and she's white, and she'd make comments about how the baby could have been ours, painting this picture of a future that tugged at my heartstrings. Whenever she felt particularly low, she'd reach out to me with questions loaded with insecurity like, "Would you still marry me?" And without hesitation, my response was always a heartfelt, "Of course I would. I love you." It felt like we were still tethered by these deep emotional bonds despite everything. But then, a trip to Florida to visit my brother over Christmas changed things. I started to feel that something was seriously off. My texts went unanswered. Our usual nighttime phone calls, she wouldn't pick up. Then, out of the blue, she called asking if I had a certain movie on DVD because she wanted to watch it with her family. But the way she asked, something in her voice, just didn't sit right with me. Returning from vacation and diving into the new semester, there was a moment that felt like it could have been a turning point. She visited me, but not in the usual sense. She was at my university for some reason, lost her Fitbit, and called me for help. I went to her, and we spent some time together, but the air between us felt charged. Different. Then she dropped a bombshell. She wanted me to visit her at her parents' house in 2 days because she had something important to discuss. The anticipation of that conversation, the sense of something looming on the horizon, it was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. After all the ups and downs, the love and the pain, I couldn't help but wonder what this talk would mean for us. That anticipation, the dread of knowing something big was about to happen, it weighed heavy on me as I headed to her parents' house. I had a gut feeling about what was coming, and after talking it over with my friends, I tried to brace myself for the worst. She had asked me to come over late, around 10 p.m., which was unusual but telling. When I got there, she climbed into my car, and we just talked for a while, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. The conversation that unfolded was exactly what I had feared. She broke it to me gently but firmly. She didn't want to date me anymore. I could only agree, having felt the growing chasm between us for a while. I had to ask, though, whether there was someone else behind her decision. She denied it, insisting that it wasn't about someone else, but rather a realization that we just weren't right for each other anymore. But then, her reasons took a turn that left me reeling. She said she had never really seen me as husband material, that she couldn't envision a future with me, getting married or having kids. The kicker? She admitted that a part of her hesitation was because our kids wouldn't look like her, given our different ethnic backgrounds. This from someone who often touted how progressive and not racist she was. The irony wasn't lost on me, and it hurt more than I could express. Hearing her say these things, after all the dreams and plans we had shared, felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. It made me question the authenticity of every moment we had shared, wondering how much of it was real and how much was just her going through the motions. It was a harsh wake-up call, a moment of clarity that showed me the painful truth about the foundation of our relationship. It was a tough pill to swallow, realizing that the person I had envisioned a whole future with had never truly seen me in theirs. She had frequently asked if I would marry her, enthusiastically talked about our future children together, painting a vivid picture of a life filled with love and shared dreams. That was the part that stung the most. How could she weave such intricate fantasies with me, only to reveal they were just that? Fantasies, with no hope or intention of becoming reality. I expressed my love for her one last time, agreeing, however, that it was best for us to part ways. The decision to go no contact was mutual, but she insisted on blocking me on Facebook, reasoning that if it were up to me, I might not stick to the decision. She believed she should be the one to take that step. I reluctantly agreed, though we didn't block each other's phone numbers, leaving a line open just in case of emergencies, given my lack of family in the state. Driving away from her parents' house that night, I was engulfed in a mix of sadness and relief. It felt like I was finally freeing myself from a weight that had been dragging me down. The following month was incredibly tough. Nights were the hardest. I'd find myself sinking into depression, realizing how much I had come to rely on her presence, her nightly calls. The loneliness was overwhelming, leading to many nights spent in tears on my bedroom floor. However, I resolved to pull myself together, channeling my energy into work, school, and rebuilding my social life with friends. It was a process of rediscovery, of learning to stand on my own again after being so deeply entwined with someone else. Then, about a month into this new chapter, out of the blue, she called me early one morning. That call, unexpected and unwelcome, threatened to unravel the progress I had made in healing and moving forward from our relationship. Answering that call, I half expected to hear that something urgent had happened, but instead, I found myself eavesdropping on a conversation not meant for my ears. It seemed like a butt dial, a strange and unlikely coincidence given our recent decision to cut off contact. Her voice was unmistakable, and there was a man's voice too, one I didn't recognize. The fragments of their conversation were muddled, but my name surfacing amidst their talk of snow caught me off guard. The call abruptly ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me, and I reached out to some friends. The news they shared confirmed my suspicions. She had moved on and was seeing someone new. Compelled by a mix of concern and, I'll admit, a need for closure, I broke our no-contact rule and messaged her, asking if she was all right. It took her a few days to reply, but when she did, she brushed off the call as an accidental dial. Yet she admitted she had been wanting to talk to me, expressing a longing for the friendship we once shared. For a brief moment during our conversation, it felt like nothing had changed between us. She confirmed what I already knew, that she was seeing someone new. When she inquired how I came to know, I mentioned hearing about it through friends. By then, I had also seen a picture of the guy she was dating, adding a face to the voice I had overheard. This exchange reopened old wounds I had been diligently trying to heal. The revelation that she was in a new relationship, coupled with her admission of missing our friendship, left me in a state of confusion. It was a reminder of the complex intertwining of love and loss, of moving on while still holding on to fragments of what used to be. As she delved into discussing her new boyfriend, highlighting his flaws, I found myself in an awkward position, merely listening to her vent. When she commented on his peculiar hair, I unwittingly agreed, not realizing she was referring to his hairstyle from years ago. This slip led to her questioning how I could possibly know about his past appearance, to which I hastily clarified my mistake, assuming she was talking about his current look. The conversation took another turn when she mentioned receiving a bunch of random friend requests on Facebook, wondering if I was behind them. I wasn't. The call ended soon after, leaving me with a mix of emotions. Part of me was happy for her, but as I reflected more on our interaction, I realized I didn't want to keep this door open any longer. It was time to truly move on. The next day, I reached out to her one last time, expressing that while I enjoyed our conversation, reminiscent of old times, it would be best for us to continue not speaking. She agreed with my decision. Taking a definitive step towards closure, I blocked her number, hoping to shield myself from further emotional turmoil. A week passed, and I found myself on campus when I noticed a voicemail notification. Curiously, my phone hadn't rung. It was her, asking if I was home. This unexpected message, despite the barriers I had put up, reminded me of the complex web of emotions and connections that don't easily unravel. It was a stark reminder that moving on is a process, one that requires both time and a firm resolve to look forward, not back. She came to drop some things off. I personally felt like there wasn't anything worth her returning, and it pisses me off that she had come and dropped the stuff off at my front door. Since no one was home, I became really annoyed. I had told her no contact anymore. I then decided to write her an email. I told her basically that I had loved her with all my heart, but that she had mistreated me in a lot of ways, lied to me, etc. I told her to thank her parents for being kind to me. We had a rather good relationship, and they actively told me how amazing of a belief I was. I then proceeded to tell her I want no contact of any kind, that she was now blocked from my phone. I said, though we live about an hour away now, it would be possible to run into each other due to friends living close to me and such. I told her, the way you treat me is how I will treat you if we see each other. If you treat me like a friend, I'll treat you like a friend. If you treat me like an enemy, I'll treat you like an enemy. If you treat me like I don't exist, I'll treat you like you don't exist. I sent the email and didn't expect to ever hear back from her. Boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I received a reply from her dad. Her dad, mind you, is an ex-Marine and a lawyer. In his email, he stated that I should leave his daughter alone. He accused me of stalking her, not sure how I was seeing as I was an hour away and busy with schoolwork and friends. He accused me of creating fake FB accounts and cyber-stalking her. Once again, I didn't create any to do that, though I have looked at her account from a friend's account a few times. But that was it. I mean, who hasn't? But then he used that line about treating her the way she treats me, and he highlighted that part and said, I consider this a threat. He proceeded to tell me to leave her alone, otherwise he would get a restraining order. I was blown away. Her dad and I had always been on good terms. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I spoke to a few people and, having studied a bit of law in university, responded to him. I told him, look, I want nothing to do with your daughter. She was the one who reinitiated contact. In fact, she came to my house without my knowledge a week ago. If I'm a stalker, why would she risk coming to my house? I told him that we both know what he had said were unsubstantiated and no judge would ever give them a restraining order. I told him, never contact me again, and I'll do the same to him and his daughter. It was then that I wondered what the FK was going on. What stories was she telling people about me? What sob tale is she spinning and why? I told some of my friends about what happened and they were blown away too. They just told me that I had dodged a nuke and I should be happy. I thought the story would end there. But like I said, this is a cheating story. A long one, but a cheating story nonetheless. So we had broken up in January, just after the first week of April. A friend of mine messaged me while I was working and told me that my ex had just gotten engaged. I was floored. It had only been 3 months for the girl that had constantly said how hard relationship had been for her because of her cheating, abusive ex-fiancé. It just didn't make sense. But what was interesting, my friend told me, was a comment that someone had put on her announcement. This person was congratulating her on her engagement and so happy she could help them get together. Back in November, the same November when we were still going out. Yes, we weren't exclusive at that point, but to me, since I had given her several outs and she lied about there being someone else, I consider that cheating. I was livid. And then everything came into place. That's why she became distant at Christmas. That's who she wanted to watch that movie with. That hurt. But I got on with my life. I was still having depression issues, trust issues. I spoke about it to some people, friends, church people, but the more I spoke about it, the more I learned about her. People who had knew her and didn't know we had dated came out and said, yeah, that girl had issues. They told me things they probably shouldn't have told me, but whatever. I found out all the nasty things she said about other people, and I began to realize that she never really cared about me. She simply wanted someone to care for her, and then dump once someone better came along. I realized that the reason I fell in love with her was not because of who she was, but what she pretended to be. She had heard about me, knew I was a nice guy, and decided I was empathic enough to trick. She simply reflected myself back at me, and I thought I was dating someone similar to me. But really, I had been dating a narcissist, but this helped me understand a lot about myself, that I care too much, love too deeply, and need to be careful who I give my love to. Lesson learned. So half a year passed. I hadn't run into her, but I had heard she had moved back to my city with her husband. So much for me being a stalker. Some of my friends had a few run-ins with her and one embarrassed her by making a S innuendo about something she had done. Love you, Danny boy. Brothers for life. I got invited to a friend's wedding. I couldn't make it to the actual ceremony, but I made it to the reception. I was just finishing up, making a small speech, making fun of my friend. Dude had a laugh that was so annoying and loud. You wouldn't believe I was ending my remarks and was about to sit down when a mutual friend started walking into the room, and who was right behind her? My ex and her husband. I saw her and was a bit surprised just as she was about to walk into the room. Our eyes met, and in the moment, instead of walking into the room, She pushed her husband back into the hallway, out of sight, and quickly followed. I was taken back and stepped out to the other side of the building to collect my thoughts and feelings. I was overall fine, but the shock of seeing her was interesting. After a few minutes, I came back into the room and noticed my ex and her husband had never entered the room. I then asked my friend if he invited her, and he said yes. I told him a heads up would have been nice, but he said that he didn't even think about it. He wasn't that close of a friend, more of a mutual friend of one of my best friends. Anyway, minutes passed, and the new couple was about to have their first dance, so we all moved some chairs out of the way. I happened to be on a side of a door putting chairs away when my ex came through that exact door, so I was right next to her and ran to the other side of the room with her husband in tow. We avoided each other the rest of the reception, except for a couple of glances, but in that moment I felt whole again. All those months after the breakup, I felt broken and like a piece of myself was missing. But in this moment, seeing how she reacted, how ashamed she seemed to be, I felt my power coming back. I felt truly happy for the first time, even though she was married and I was not. I had won the breakup. She was ashamed to even look at me. I had no such problems. I had an overall clear conscience. And now here I am over 4 years after the breakup writing this. I'm still single, but overall, I'm happy. And Maddie, if you end up reading this, FKU, I'm the one who ended up finishing university, and you're just a housewife. After all that talk about changing the world, and that's all you're ever going to change our dirty diapers and be a fucking liar and a cheat. Thanks for reading. So there you have it, guys.